can be the one that steals my heart. Just a simple thought of who you are. Let your light shine in the darkest parts. Let your love fill the world. You can be the fire down in my soul that I can't contain, I can't control. Would you fill me up to overflow? Let your love fill the world. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. Let your words be like a burning flame, coming close to touch my heart again. The whole earth trembles at the sound of your name. Let your love fill the world. All I want is more of you. Your breath is life, your word is truth. Your glory here is bursting through. Let your love fill the world. I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And you have set my heart on fire. My love and my desire are only for you. And as your glory fills this place, love we will embrace only for you, for you. And I belong to you, forever I belong to you. We belong to you, forever we belong to you. Yes, I belong to you, forever I belong to you. And we belong to you, forever we belong to you.
Hello, it's good to be with you today. Today marks 2 weeks since we celebrated Easter together this year. Easter, that crescendo of the Christian faith, the day that we remember and celebrate this wild reality that Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus' resurrection is a point of historic fact, but it's also a reality that has come to pass, that is being unfolded, its power and its implications in every aspect of our life, fundamentally in the promise that newness is always possible. And this Easter, there were stories of particular displays of God's resurrection power, of God's newness in our midst. And so I wanted to bring one of those stories to you today. I want to invite you to listen to how it was that Kat Phelps from our community experienced Jesus' newness of life around her this Easter.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kat, and I have been coming to the river for about 9 months. I wanted to share a story about faith in following God's Word. My parents and I are estranged, but I do have a relationship with my grandparents, including my grandmother. Growing up, my grandparents were atheists and talk openly about their disbelief in God. I am a believer in God and do my best to follow His Word. Lately, when I would be praying during service, my grandmother would often come to mind, and I felt a nudge by God to invite her to church. At first, I ignored it. I was nervous. What would she think of me? Would I make her uncomfortable if I invited her? How much would it hurt after the loss of my parents for her to say no or to reject me because of the invite? I brought it up to my small group, and they encouraged me to let God in, to take a leap of faith, and to invite her to church service. They prayed with me and reminded me that when God speaks, it is our role to listen. I was too nervous to call, so I invited my grandma over text message to Easter Sunday church service. She responded with, "I would love to come." She and my grandpa came to Easter service, and she commented how much she enjoyed it. I let her know she could come anytime she wanted, and she said, "I would love to come with you again." I learned that when I listen to the nudging of God, it is for a reason, and being vulnerable with my beliefs with others can lead to great things in faith. I also learned that God speaks to us in many different ways, like through my friends in faith in my small group. Their encouragement and prayers led me to open my heart to God's Word. Thank you.
The hope and the joy that often surges in us around Easter, appropriately so, is a wonderful thing to experience. It is the gift of God on offer for us. And it is often a hope and a joy that is hard to hold on to, at least at that climactic level, for long as we return to the dailiness of our lives. And that is why the church calendar invites us not just to one day of celebrating Easter, but to an entire season known as Eastertide, the 50 days following Easter Sunday, in which we take our time with the reality and the implications of the resurrection story. Wise leaders in the early days of the church knew that it would be a process for us to get into our minds and our hearts and our bodies the implications of the resurrection in ways that would shape the way we live from day to day. So that's what we do in the season of Eastertide. And this Eastertide at the river, we're focusing in on one particular area of implication around the resurrection, and that is the life-giving power that is breathed into the community of God's people. Community is one of our 4 key values as a church at the river. And so in this season again, we're asking, what difference does it make to be a community of people empowered with the resurrection power and resurrection hope of Jesus? Last Sunday, if you participated in our stream or maybe were with us in person, you had a chance to hear Grace talk about the way that the life-giving power of God in community enables us to bring our vulnerabilities to one another, those parts of our lives in which we feel weak and in need. We are given freedom to bring and then to stand with one another in those places in solidarity. It's a word of substantial hope and life to a world in which we are often hustling alone. But as you might guess, that's not the only implication of the resurrection for the community of God, the family of God. Today we want to explore the idea that the life-giving love of God for God's family can't be contained within the family, that it overflows. That is the movement of God's love. It overflows the bounds of God's family, and it moves to bless those around. That word of movement of God's love, of blessing out to all around the family of God, was central to Jesus' message to his disciples before he returned to be with the Father. I think about the appearance of the risen Jesus to Peter shortly after his death. You may remember that things didn't go especially well for Peter at the end of Jesus' life. Having boldly proclaimed that no matter how many people deserted Jesus, Peter would stand with him to the end, Peter was found denying Jesus not once, but 3 times on the night of his arrest. So when in the aftermath of Jesus' resurrection, when Jesus was appearing to his disciples, there was joy, obviously, but also, just as we talked about for ourselves, confusion about what it all meant, what the implications of Jesus' resurrection were, and what life would be like now. So one of the vignettes were given of the disciples in the days after Jesus' resurrection was of Peter calling some of the others and inviting them to a night of fishing. And they spent all night out in the boat, catching nothing. It must not have done much to help their mood if they were in sort of a confused and uncertain place. But in the morning, a voice called to them from the shore, and in a reminder, an echo of something that they had experienced early on in their days with Jesus, this voice called out to them and said, "Throw out the nets one more time." And when they did, their nets were bursting with fish, and their eyes were open to know that that person calling to them from the shore was indeed Jesus. They rush into Jesus. Jesus makes them breakfast. And then there is this poignant interaction between Peter and Jesus. It's recorded in the Gospel of John, the 21st chapter, starting in verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The 3rd time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." You know, if this interaction were a scene in a movie, I would imagine the camera lens coming in real close, focusing down on the faces of Jesus and Peter as they share this moment. Jesus is so intentional in his love for Peter here. Even though it was hard for Peter, Jesus gave him 3 opportunities to confess the depths of his love for Jesus, to match those 3 occasions of denial. It's a moving display of Jesus' personal attention and restoration of Peter. But then when the camera pans back, we're reminded that this exchange took place in a circle with the rest of the disciples all around. And Peter was being restored in relationship with Jesus as a leader in this community. And that awareness has caused me to think a little differently this year about the part of their interaction that is Jesus' commission or recommission of Peter to ministry. I think I've always seen that before as mostly about Peter, a symbol that Jesus has fully welcomed Peter back into and onto his team. And it certainly is that. But I know enough about Jesus to know that he was always teaching. And given that this exchange happened in public, I think it's very possible that Jesus was also expressing something about the movement of God's love as he restored Peter. That Peter was to receive the love of God and then to let the love of God flow through him to others. That is the universal movement of God's love. We receive it in the family of God and we let it overflow to bless the world around us. And that's precisely what happens in the early church. Not long after this interaction between Jesus and Peter, we're given in the book of Acts in the New Testament this vivid description of life in the early church. This is Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. It says the early believers, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I love this picture of the early church. It feels very three-dimensional to me, a vision for us of the possibility for God's family, for the community of God's people, especially the community empowered by the resurrection. There's a fullness of life for those on the inside and an overflow to those around them. The church is learning and worshiping. They're experiencing miracles in their midst, including a radical sharing of their possessions with one another. They're together. Even eating was fun. I love that line about how they enjoyed their meals with gladness of heart. The presence and love of God in their midst was powerful, and it overflowed to those around them. The church, it says, enjoyed favor. People liked them. People regarded them highly. And many chose to join them and their way of life patterned after the way of Jesus. This is the movement of God's life-giving love. The love of God for the family of God flowed through them to others. God's love is always expanding in that way. I do want to say, though, that I wonder sometimes if it's possible that everyone in the early church loved this flow. I mean, do you think it's possible that some of the folks in the early church occasionally felt pressed upon? That maybe occasionally there was some grumbling about another mouth to cook for, another place to be made in the circle of relationships? And it doesn't say anything about this kind of thing in the grand description that we're given. And it is certain that something profound of God's Spirit was moving in the early church to lay this kind of inspirational foundation for what life could be like among the people of God. And everyone in that crowd were real people. And my awareness of real people is that we don't all respond to hospitality in the same way. And hospitality would be one way of talking about the overflowing love of the people of God, the family of God. For many of us, probably when we hear the word hospitality, we picture a specific scenario, the idea of hosting people in our home, of having to tidy up and get a meal together because people are coming over. And hospitality certainly includes that. But broadly speaking, hospitality is about awareness and welcome to those who, for whatever reason, feel on the outside. Hospitality is about awareness and welcome to those on the outside of the circle. So hospitality always involves making room at the table, making room in conversation, making room in our circle of friends, making room in our own hearts. And depending on how much room you feel like there is, room I'm talking about in terms of time and energy and relationships specifically, that can feel more or less challenging to you. I mean, hospitality flows pretty freely when you live with an experience and a posture of abundance. And I think that's what's happening, what we see in the early church. Broadly speaking, they experienced so much life and goodness of God in their community that maybe it was generally easy for them to assume that there was plenty to go around. The joy that they experienced in sharing what they had just fed that sense of abundance. But a posture of abundance is not reflexive for all of us, given our varied experiences in life. And some of us might recognize in ourselves something that resembles more of a posture of scarcity, feeling or fearing that there might not be enough to go around, and that if we share what we have, the result will be this, that we'll have less. It's not hard to live with a feeling of scarcity in the Silicon Valley, in my experience, especially as it relates to the commodities of time and energy and relationships. So if we considered a simple two-dimensional spectrum running from an interior experience of, on the one side, considerable scarcity, to, on the other side, a considerable abundance, we'd likely find in any group of people plots all along that axis. And most of us, while having a tendency likely to one side or the other of the spectrum, would find that our plot point would be in a different location depending on what area of life we're exploring together. So I want to invite you to a moment of reflection specific to the area of hospitality. When it comes to hospitality expressed as awareness and welcome to the outsider, what kind of inner posture or inner disposition do you find that you live from? Do you find it relatively easy to make room in your life and your circle of community to include others? Do you find that you carry an implicit sense that there's certainly enough here to share? Or when you look, do you find in yourself more of an urge to conserve, carrying a concern that what you have often feels like precious little that you can't risk losing? Now, I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a family that was a setting of hospitality. My parents were quick to include others in the circle of our family, and even as a teenager, I felt aware that that gift had come to them through my grandparents. So growing up, it was a common experience for me that there were extra people around our house in various forms. My dad's business colleagues, when they would visit from out of town, often stayed with us versus staying in a hotel. Friends of ours who had friends without contact in the area where we lived would often connect us. and we would host those people, particularly on holidays. Our church had seminary students, pastors in training, who would operate as interns with our youth group in the summertime. And if those folks weren't from the local area, they often lived with us. So all of those things and more certainly meant that there was a lot of life around our house. And sometimes it felt a little crowded to me. It's even possible that on occasion I grumbled about it a little bit. I know, hard to believe. But particularly as a teenager, I wasn't convinced that I wanted that extra exposure of more people at the dinner table or the work of getting to know someone else. I was content in the foursome of our nuclear family, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I. And I asked the question at times, do we really need to include others? But while there are reasonable questions to ask here, which I do want to highlight, because there is factual scarcity. We know this most plainly in our material resources, when there just isn't enough food to go around the table. But there can be scarcity of relationship as well, where there isn't enough attention in a family, say, for people to thrive. But that wasn't the case in my family. There was plenty of love and attention to go around and to share. My parents were connected toward the abundance of God toward them and offered themselves as conduits of sharing that love to those who were in need in any way around them. And their model, and ultimately my reflection on my experience of that hospitality, has helped me to be a person who can trust and live out of a perspective of abundance, albeit unevenly at times. It is important to name that being part of God's family of overflowing love does require something of us. So if it feels like work at points or that there's risk involved, that's real. I mean, an immediate case in point would be our participation this weekend in San Jose's Viva Calle Festival. You may or may not know that this Sunday, when we're releasing this stream, is approximately quarterly Viva Calle celebration in San Jose, where a path is marked out in one part of the city and streets are blocked off to become pedestrian throughways for walkers or runners or bikers or rollerbladers, with specific stopping points that are hosted along the way. And it was only about a month ago that our staff team became aware that Viva Calle this weekend is coming directly by our building here at the river at Parkmore and Lincoln. And when that came to our attention, there was honestly two responses. The first one was, what an opportunity! What an opportunity to be part of our community and to let the love of God overflow from our midst in the form of hosting games and snacks and friendly faces along the route. But also in the room and in the conversation was a very real counting of the cost of that. We learned about this just 2 weeks before Holy Week, which is an active week around here. And we had to ask the question, do we have it in us to turn around and host something together again so shortly after the fullness of Easter week? But together, we were able to decide to move forward. And that really is a picture of the counting of the cost that can be involved in hospitality, but also a picture of the beauty of hospitality in community, that we share the load together. And that's what's happening on Sunday morning at the river. So the question I want to leave us with as I begin to conclude today is this: how can I, together with my community, express the life-giving power of the resurrection in overflowing love toward those around me? That was kind of a lot of words. So maybe I could simplify it and just say, what is the invitation of hospitality to me and my part of the family of God right now? What is the invitation of hospitality to me and my circle of the family of God right now? Now, I'm very aware that not everyone hearing my voice today feels integrated into a meaningful circle of Christian community, a meaningful circle of the family of God, where you know your place and your people. And one of the consistent prayers that our team is praying during this series is that all of us would take some step toward initiating a greater experience of community. Maybe you're in the situation of responding somehow to the hospitality of the people of God in this season, or to deepen the experience of the community that we already share. But for those of us who are in somewhat defined circles of community, in small groups, in friendship circles, in households or families, what is the current opportunity to let the love of God flow out from you and bless those around you? There are innumerable ways to be hospitable, to be aware and welcoming of those around you. I mean, you could include others in your circles of relationship. Bring newcomers into your small group, or friends from your work into a barbecue you host with your church friends, or neighbors. Invite them to dessert with your household. When you let the vision of the early church and its deep experience of the love and the presence of God and its overflowing nature to those around it take root in your imagination, when you meditate for a while on the overflowing nature of the love of God, you might just be surprised at the creative opportunities that present themselves to you to extend hospitality to others. I'm going to invite you to take some time before we move into worship to reflect on the realm of hospitality and how it is that you might extend yourself in overflowing the love of God toward others. But before we do that, I want to come back to this idea of the source from which the hospitality of God's family flows. And that's the abundance of God. Our experience of the abundance of God sets us in a ready place to extend God's hospitality to others. And I expect that for some listening today, your honest response to the encouragement to be part of the overflowing love of God is, I just don't think so. It's a nice vision, but it's not practical for me. I don't have the time, the energy, the circle of relationships that I'm willing to expand or let change because of others at this time in my life. And there are likely a bunch of factors that contribute to a response like that. And I think it's a response that's important to make room for, to listen to, and to bring before God. Because it's very possible that embedded somewhere in that response is the statement that you are not experiencing the abundance of God in the way that you could at this time in your life. So in addition to questions for reflection on how you might be involved in hospitality in this current season, I'm also going to offer a meditation for you to possibly pick up on the abundance of God. And I encourage you to make use of it this week and in coming weeks, and to see how it is that God might meet you as you do. Pay attention for any shifts. Sometimes those shifts in us are subtle, but they're real. There's a turning happening. Pay attention for that kind of turning. I'd love to hear about it if any of you have interest to share how God meets you as you put yourself before God honestly in this area of needing to know more of God's abundance. But for now, I'll leave you with these resources, and just let me pray for you as you can take time to pause the stream, reflect and pray, and then join in worship. God, thank you for these pictures of your resurrection life being full among your people, in your community, in your family. Lord, for the ways in which we have experienced that, we give you thanks. And for the ways in which we feel uncertain of how real it is because it doesn't match our experience, we ask you, Lord, to help us, to show us your abundance, that we could live from that place. Lord, make your community a place of your overflowing love to the blessing of the world around it. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
show your care for me. Night or day, blue or gray, my God is there with me. Going out or lying down, when I sleep or when I rise, for a word is on my tongue, for a thought comes into form, I will know that you are watching over me. I can't run and I can't flee, 'cause everywhere you are there with me. Every turn you show your care for me. Night or day, blue or gray, my God is there with me. Everywhere you are there with me. Every turn you show your care for me. Night or day, blue or gray, my God is there with me. My God, you're here with me. When you're not sure who you really are, when all you feel is the shape of your scars, and you have more wounds than you can count. Open your eyes, look all around. You aren't alone, this is your home. Come and remember who you are here. Do this to remember who I am. Come and remember you belong here. All belong here. When don't know how to forgive. When locked doors seem like the only way to live. You've got more questions than you can count. Open your eyes, look all around. You aren't alone, this is your home. Come and remember who you are here. Do this to remember who I am. Come and remember you belong here. All belong here. And at this table, come as you are. Broken and bleeding's okay. And at this table, eat and be filled. Come and drink in this grace. Come and drink in this grace. Come and remember who you are here. Do this to remember who I am. Come and remember you belong here. All belong here. Come and remember who you are here. Do this to remember who I am. Come and remember you belong here.